Greetings, my name is Ryan Nix. I'm a solutions architect with Amazon Web Services. Joining me here today is Matt. Matt, say hi.
Hey guys, my name is Matt Slott and I'm a principal solution architect at Veeam Kasten.
So Veeam Kasten is a backup recovery. You had a much more elegant way of articulating this solution that we typically run on top of container platforms protecting container workloads. So whether that is virtual machines running on top of a container platform or alternatively app modernization workloads. Matt saved me here. What was that nicer term?
Sure, yes, yeah, and I've got marketing looking at me to tell me it's data resiliency. It's really kind of, as an organization and company, our focus is wholly on backup, data protection, and disaster recovery. And in the case of Kasten, it's definitely anything running in Kubernetes, whether it's a virtual machine, as you say, whether it's a containerized workload, and that could be an operator or what have you. But
so failure protection, protection against accidental change, whether that is accidental deletion, ransomware becoming a new topic over there, and potentially some lift and shift movements depending on the use case.
Absolutely, yep.
Right, let's peel back the onion and let's take a moment and have a look at Veeam Kasten and really dive into when you deploy the product onto something like a OpenShift environment, what manifests in that environment and what are really the building blocks over there. Let's jump in.
Cool, all right, so yes. First and foremost, I want to highlight that Kasten itself is a Kubernetes application. So when we deploy to a cluster, we are installed on the cluster that we're deploying to. We're not a third party that is just hooking in. We're actually in the cluster.
So in the context of OpenShift, this is a containerized workload that has been deployed into that OpenShift cluster. It's running on that cluster. Operator framework via the OpenShift operator hub, or you're pulling down a Helm chart and you're deploying either through an automation process or through some sort of manual interaction.
Exactly.
So looking at this from an OpenShift perspective, OpenShift has a web console experience which is exposed through HTTP, HTTPS, and then there is also an API endpoint that typically runs on the OpenShift control plane. And we can see both of those over here. So whether you are dealing with this from a CLI or a automation perspective, some sort of DevOps tool chain that's hooking into the system, that's typically going to come in through that API endpoint or that CLI endpoint. Black screen, white text, no frills, no fuss. The graphical web interface coming through a HTTPS or typically an encrypted channel. In AWS, we don't typically see that as being publicly exposed. It's much more common to see both of these as private, so there has to be some work in the AWS networking environment for customers to, how do I get from on-premises to this to manage it? How do I get from, wherever my entry points are that are relevant? If this is an application workload and I'm exposing it publicly, which we wouldn't do in this case, I think, we would have to answer the question of how do I do this publicly. So you can have a look at things like transit gateways. We have a look at things like security layers in front of this. In the context of this, any sort of browser graphical interaction by a DevOps admin or security admin going to come through the web interface?
Yeah, and actually via two ways. So you can either hit the Kasten interface via the web interface, so going to the URL that Kasten is that.
Treated as another application workload, essentially.
Yeah, or with an OpenShift, if you're running OpenShift on EKS, like ROSA, there's actually a dynamic console plugin directly in OpenShift that if you install it via the operator, you'll see Veeam Kasten appear. That can be your conduit into the backup environment as well.
Yeah, so let's talk authentication very quickly, because obviously there is authentication to get into the platform, and then all of these operator components for this product to actually back up and interact with all of the components of the things that it is backing up. It needs a fair bit of permissions with inside something of OpenShift. So I'm assuming that there's two things at play here. I am making the assumption that there is going to be some interaction with the underlying AWS resources, and there's also going to be some interaction with the OpenShift construct. So from an AWS standpoint, there is going to be a little bit of IAM. So IAM policy that is attached and defined either in the Helm chart or in the operator during install. So over here we have AWS identity and access management, and we would have a policy that is assumed by the system. Inside OpenShift itself, typical role-based access control, I'm assuming.
Exactly, yep, and we can fully integrate actually out of the box. We now have made it a tick box to integrate with OAuth. So for actual user authentication, we can use the same authentication mechanism you're using for Red Hat OpenShift.
This is very documented, predefined. Customers who want to rabbit hole and do a security assessment on this can go into the Veeam Kasten documentation, find this, and scrutinize it.
Yep, docs.kasten.io.
We will add a link in the description related to the video. Telemetry, metering, I can see we've got the logging, the metering, Prometheus. These are all constructs within OpenShift. So how OpenShift is doing its logging, how all of the other applications are doing logging, we're piggybacking off of the same architecture essentially.
Exactly, and using Prometheus statistics and metering, we can essentially see the progress of jobs, their time to complete. Essentially, you can take that data, feed it into something like Grafana, and you get some nice graphical reports and usage interfaces.
Okay, so these are all running on OpenShift. They're going to interact with some sort of storage. So when we define the definitions of what is backed up, where it is backed up to, the frequency of things, I'm assuming that's going to live inside that catalog over there. And we've got some sort of persistent storage attached to that catalog.
Yes.
What is that persistent storage typically? Is that something like EFS or EBS, or is it something like S3?
It's typically an EBS, EFS, FSX, essentially for...
And that is over here at the storage layer over here?
Yes, exactly. So we have our CSI drivers, typically how we talk to storage. And you can actually see of the components here, there's a few that have PDCs attached. So there's logging service, Prometheus, and metering. And then our catalog service, think of that as the core brain of Kasten. So that's when we protect Kasten via...
It's actually the metadata and configuration for the product in itself.
Exactly. Okay. Yep. And that's typically on EBS. So I'll put that right here. Or could be on EFS or any other storage that has some sort of CSI. So I'll put that in parentheses.
Okay, so if you're using a third-party shared storage model, something like an ODF,
yep,
potentially coming into the picture there as well.
Exactly.
We can move some of that configuration out to something like S3. Also, the backups themselves are going out to something like S3 if you're on AWS.
Exactly, yep. So I'll do my little our little data store for S3, and essentially when we export, because as we know, snapshots are not backup, so we need to make sure we get that data off of the cluster so we can send that to something like S3 and use something like object lock and immutability to ensure that we've got that ransomware protection.
So if we're deploying the Kasten operator across multiple clusters, most of my customers are in a hybrid context and they are in a multi-cluster context. They've got separate clusters for dev, UAT, production. It's deploy the operator onto each of those, and we can take that catalog configuration and essentially replay it, get cookie cutter administration. We previously discussed something called the multi-cluster manager.
Yep.
That is not a separate add-on component. That is literally deploy this operator, specify in one of all of them that this is the overarching cluster manager, and then register the rest back to this.
Exactly. And if you, for whatever reason, you lose that instance of Kasten, you can obviously elect another leader.
Promote one of the others.
Yep.
Do you need to shift the registrations, or when you promote it, are they part of a grouping?
You would have to shift, yes, you would have to shift the registration essentially to the new one.
Okay, so very, very simply, promote the new one,
yep,
re-register all of the hosts.
Exactly.
And minor inconvenience. From a purchasing and procurement perspective, when we have a look at the operators, Red Hat's got an operator hub. Red Hat also has like a marketplace attached to that operator hub. AWS has AWS Marketplace. Can customers procure Kasten through those different marketplaces?
Absolutely, yes. And in the case of if you're doing a hybrid term license, so a 1-year license, you can actually purchase that on AWS and apply it to, on the AWS Marketplace, you can apply it to a Kasten instance on OpenShift or on any other Kubernetes distribution.
Okay, and from a licensing or costing perspective, it is per compute node that the product is protecting.
Exactly, yep. And we essentially, and it's an average of the number of worker nodes, right? So we understand that Kubernetes, you might be scaling up, adding additional worker nodes, and maybe scaling down. we, over a 30-day period, the average number, that's what you need the license for. So if you, let's say you're licensed for 30 nodes and then essentially you scale up to 40, we're not going to go knocking down your door to try to collect, unless you do that over a long period of time, then we'll have a true up.
And for customers who have a very dynamic environment, there is a pay-as-you-go option.
Exactly, yep. So if you don't want to worry about that at all, we have a pay-as-you-go within AWS as well as within the Red Hat Operator Marketplace.
Okay. Matt, thank you very much. It's, as always, a pleasure having you here.
Awesome. Yeah, very much appreciate the time. Appreciate everybody joining us and watching. And for more info, definitely check out our documentation or check out some of the additional videos we're releasing.
And thank you.